back with another episode of App Stories. We have a big episode today. I'm here, of course, with Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's a beautiful day. We're heading into the summer here. It's still too cool in Chicago, but things are looking up. But we have a lot to talk about today. Of course, I want to thank our three sponsors for this episode, which is Linode, AppFigures, and Devon Technologies, the maker of DevonThink. We're going to talk about iOS 15 and our wishes for that, because this is another continuation of our wishes episodes leading up to WWDC and iOS 15. We got a lot of wishes here, Federico. I mean, I think we're gonna skip our what's new segment for today and dive right into iOS 15.
Let's do it. Okay, so we are just gonna take turns, and we're just gonna mention everything that's on our minds that's in this document. It's just a big load of features that we wanna talk about. All right, so I guess the obvious one, home screen customization, right? I don't know to what extent Apple was surprised to see the reaction of the general public to iOS 14. I have to assume that maybe to an extent they kind of saw it coming. They knew that maybe there was some pent-up demand for personalization on the home screen with widgets and custom icons. But I also think that maybe they couldn't quite foresee just how many millions of people would get into all of this, and how viral the whole, set up your home screen aesthetic thing would go. And so I feel like, given the reaction to iOS 14, and given how I still see my non-techie friends tweak their home screens, like it's not a fad that has gone away. Apps like Widgetsmith, for example, I still see them on my friends' home screens. Yep. And those home screens, I've realized, they have become seasonal things. And like with springtime, I know that a bunch of my friends set up their home screen differently with different colors, for example. Or maybe they're based on mood, right? Or maybe, maybe you broke up with your partner and now you're in a sad mood and you want to have like an entirely black home screen, or maybe you want to drop some inspirational quotes in there, right? I've seen my friends do that. And so I feel like Apple needs to address this market again in iOS 15. And so I will say I want to see more on the home screen customization front. And especially, I think it's time for Apple to let us fully customize the icons of the apps that we want to put on the home screen. No more shortcuts hacks, no more create a shortcut with the open app action and add that to your home screen. Right. No more utilities that install custom signing profiles on your device to put a custom icon on your home screen. I just want to go in settings, select an app, and say, use this different icon for it.
Yep.
I think that's the right approach. And to an extent, designers and developers will be upset, but also I feel like we're well past that point, right? People are gonna change their icons no matter what, and so why not just give in to this trend and let people do it properly?
Yeah, Federico, we already did Mac OS, but I wish this was on Mac OS as well, because a lot of the apps that we're seeing on iOS and the iPad are coming to the Mac with Catalyst. And a lot of those developers have custom icon sets in their iOS and iPadOS versions of their apps, but they can't offer those. And in some respects, that's a significant path to monetization of a lot of these apps. So, I'd like to see it there as well. One thing I want, I think the icons are a great idea, but I also want the ability to set a different wallpaper per screen, per home screen, because I feel like, it's just like you said. I mean, you can set one per mood. You could set one for the holidays. You could have, my productivity apps are on my blue page, and my fun video apps or whatever are on my green page. Something that gives people visual cues as to what the purpose of each home screen is. And you combine that with things like widgets, and you could come up with some really neat implementations, I think.
Per screen wallpapers is a great idea. Actually, I didn't think about that, but yes, that would be lovely. And speaking of multiple pages on the home screen, One of the features that Apple introduced in iOS 14 is the ability to tap and hold on the page indicators
Right.
at the bottom of the home screen and hide or show specific pages of apps and widgets, which is a good way to sort of clean up your home screen in just a couple of taps, right? Without having to actually rearrange icons or, move them to the app library. Now, this feature is very nice. However, I feel like it could use a bunch more options. First of all, I would love to reorder those pages to move them around, but also I just want to be able to automate the process of enabling and disabling these pages using shortcuts. Basically, the idea is, imagine if you could set up multiple pages beforehand, right? And maybe it could also
Right.
work with your idea of a per-screen wallpaper. So you could do a work home screen that has like a serious wallpaper and work-related icons for work apps. But then you could also have a downtime home screen or a personal home screen. And imagine if you could automate the process of switching those home screens back and forth during the day using shortcuts, using automation. So you could say, when I'm at work, enable this home screen and make it the first one. But then as I leave for work, put up my personal home screen and make it the primary one. I feel like that could be a nice tie-in with shortcuts, and it would further advance the idea of each home screen is totally yours, is totally personalized, and now you can also automate it.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot because you could use things like geofencing triggers or time of day triggers and all those kinds of things with shortcuts in order to enable those. The other thing, I think we heard a rumor, now it's been a while ago now, which is that at one point, people thought that Apple was going to allow wallpapers to be sold, that they were going to be organized in folders in packs. And that never happened. I think maybe that was iOS 13, I want to say.
Yeah, well, maybe
Or was it
last
12?
Year.
Or was it 14? I don't know.
Nah, it wasn't 12.
No, it wasn't
No.
that long ago. But in any event, that never materialized. And given that, we've seen the trend towards customizing icons and widgets and everything like that, why not add wallpapers to that mix too and make it another thing that developers and designers can sell to the public? This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. You can simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines, helping you develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing enterprise infrastructure, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions that allow you to take your project to the next level. You can expect simple pricing with no hidden fees from Linode, unlike other cloud hosting companies that might charge you for services you don't use. Linode is independently owned and founded on a love for Linux, open source technologies, and the community that surrounds them. They provide 24/7 human support, 365 days a year with no tiers and no handoffs, regardless of your plan size. And you can check it out all for free. We're using Linode for a super secret project that we've been working on for months at Mac Stories. We're not quite ready to reveal it yet, but the experience with Linode has been fantastic in terms of the variety of services offered, their reliability, and the reasonable pricing. Get started right now on Linode today with $100 of free credit for listeners of App Stories by going to linode.com/appstories. In addition to shared and dedicated compute instances, you can use your $100 credit on S3 compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and a whole lot more. If it runs on Linux, it runs on Linode. So head on over to linode.com/appstories and click on the Create Free Account button to get started. Go there now and check it out. Our thanks to Linode for their support of the show.
John, let me ask you, do you use the app library on your iPhone?
Not really. A little bit once in a while, but...
And why is that?
Well, because it's too far over is the problem, and I'm not the one controlling how it's organized. Those are the two main problems, right?
And I mean, those are the two wishes for this section that we have.
Yeah, because that's the thing is that it's got a nice search functionality, but on the other hand, why not just use the Spotlight search if you're going to search for your app? So that's what I end up doing. So yeah, I don't use it a whole lot. Which is unfortunate because it's I think the idea is right. I just think it's in the wrong place. And I actually would go so far as to eliminate the Today View completely and replace it with the app library, because I think
I don't disagree.
I don't think we need another place for widgets over on the left where the Today View is. I mean, it's nice to have that. I do use it a little bit, but not as much as I thought I would. So I wouldn't mind replacing it with a way to get to my apps a lot faster.
Yeah, I again, I don't disagree. I think that's the right idea. Another potential approach will be to just mimic what Android does, right? So a swipe up from the bottom of the home screen, that would open the, what's it called, the app launcher on Android. And that could potentially be, because that gesture is currently free on the home screen, you could show the app library that way, but also getting rid of the Today View. It feels like it's about time. And I wonder, my theory is that Apple didn't get rid of the Today View last year because they had to keep the legacy widgets.
Right. The ones that were actually interactive, right?
Exactly. But because Apple said last year that those widgets were already deprecated, right? So as soon as they go away, my question is the Today View going away as well, along with those? We'll see, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Today View, is no more, and that is the new place for the app library.
Yeah, the Today View has never felt quite right, I think, ever since it started. I mean, it's been useful, but never quite felt like it totally fit in with the system.
And to your point, I would also add, let me, at the very least, reorder the categories of the app library, if not downright customize them, or say, hey, I don't care about lifestyle. Never show this category in the app library. Or maybe let me create my own categories. Like, I don't know, let me create a weekend category based on the apps that I use in the weekend, stuff like that. I don't know. But more control for sure. And lastly, on the topic of the home screen, the other obvious one, interactive widgets. I feel like this is the one that everybody is asking for right now. The current widget kit framework that launched for developers in iOS 14, it is designed in pure Swift UI to be glanceable and to provide you with visual updates throughout the day. Those widgets in iOS 14 were not designed to support inline interactions. Some developers have figured out some clever ways around this limitation, like the soar widgets, which we mentioned a bunch of times. But other developers just had to accept the reality that when you tap on a widget in iOS 14, it launches the app in a specific section. Look, for example, at the timery widgets, right? When you want to start one of your saved timers and you tap on it, it doesn't start the timer in line. It leaves the home screen and it takes you into timery.
Right.
And I feel like in iOS 15, I would like that limitation to be lifted so that I can go back to tapping, at the very least, just tapping buttons and have the widget react to my command without launching the associated application.
I like to think that the new iPad Pros that were announced are a sign that this is coming, because they've got all of that RAM in there, which will allow those widgets to be actually running some code, in real time on the desktop, at least, or on the home screen, which is what I'm hoping. And I could see them being announced at WWDC with the ability to test those things on the iPad Pro over the summer, and then getting new iPhones in the fall that pack more RAM into them and allow for that to work on the iPhone as well.
I like the way you're thinking today, John. I like it every day, but today especially with these features. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm not expecting like all kinds of input on these widgets on the home screen.
Right.
But I could make a case for keyboard input, for microphone input, like imagine being able to dictate a note into a widget on iOS 15.
And simple animations and things like that, I think would be useful.
This stuff has been possible on Android for a long time, right? But also, the widget kit framework and Swift UI, it's very different from how it works on Android. So
right.
I would like Apple to figure this one out.
All right, we should move on to some of the apps and system apps and things like that, Federico. What do you have for us in Safari?
Safari, okay. I will say I have two main wishes and a bunch of extras. So the main one is I just want to have a new tab view on the iPhone, especially since I used Firefox as my main browser for a while. I really cannot stand the 3D carousel tab view in Safari for iPhone anymore.
Yeah.
Just give me a simple grid of thumbnails. I don't want that scrollable vertical list. It's so inconvenient, and it doesn't like it. I just find the way that Firefox or Chrome do it much simpler and faster than the Safari version.
Yeah, I agree. I've never been a big fan of the way the toolbars shrink on Safari on the iPhone either. I mean, I understand why that is. You obviously get more content that way. But then if I want to get to the share button, I have to kind of then scroll back the other direction a little bit to get to the button, which
you
always
gotta give it a little nudge.
Yeah, you got to give it a little nudge to make it appear, and it always or to get up in the address bar. You can tap up there, but I don't know. It's always bothered me a little bit, and I'd like to see all of those elements rethought a little bit. And for instance, too, the fact that there are two ways to share in Safari. You can select text and select share from the pop-up, or you can select share from the toolbar in the app. And I understand what the distinction between those two things is, but I'm sure most people don't. And I feel like maybe there's room to kind of rethink a lot of these different aspects of how text selection and manipulating individual pages work on Safari.
Mm-hmm. The other wish that I have is for, I mentioned this before, I think. I just want to have, this is a pipe dream that's never going to happen. I want to have a standalone reading list app. So I want Apple to take the current reading list feature of Safari and make it into its own app. It's never going to happen, so I will be happy with just any sign of life in Safari reading list. It's been basically untouched for the past 5, 6, 7 years or something like that.
We talked about this recently, and things like folders or tagging, those sorts of things would be kind of nice.
Archiving articles instead of deleting them.
Right.
Being able to save highlights from those articles somewhere in reading list. There's plenty of features that Apple could, add to reading list, but I don't think they're ever gonna make it a standalone app. So maybe just make it a little better. That would be enough. As for other things, it would be nice if I could finally capture the PDF version of a long web page using the screenshot method.
Yes.
So if you're not aware of this, in iOS 13, I think, Apple added a way for users to take screenshots of web pages that are actually PDF documents. So when you're in Safari, take a screenshot, and when you take a screenshot, you will see that the screenshot annotation view, the markup view, will have an additional segment called full page capture. And if you switch to that, that is actually a PDF of the full page. The problem is, for a long time, due to a WebKit limitation, I believe, long web pages, and I totally noticed this because I wanted to make PDF versions of my own reviews.
Yes, it's a Mac Stories bug. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily a bug if it's a limitation, but it's something that we run across with our stories quite often.
Yeah. If you try and capture the PDF of a long web page, it'll be truncated at some point, which is unfortunate. So I think the bug in WebKit has since been fixed. So it would be nice if this was also fixed in the capturing method in Safari. And lastly, I will mention it'd be pretty cool to see Apple get into the VPN game. Specifically when it comes to blocking ads, blocking web trackers, and all kinds of intrusive data collection tools that are so often embedded on web pages these days. And I know that Safari has its own intelligent tracking prevention feature, but I think it's time for Apple to consider making a VPN that includes Safari, obviously, but also any app on your device. And it doesn't have to be like an actual VPN that connects to the internet. These days, you can make local VPN utilities that encrypt your network traffic and eliminate contact for some of those services, right? And we've seen an example of this recently. John, you wrote about it with OneBlocker, right?
Right. Because Apple just introduced the app tracking transparency, but that only applies when information is being shared across different sites or different apps. There's still the ability for individual companies to do what they call first-party trackers, which is collecting data that they only use themselves. And something like OneBlocker allows you to block that traffic as well, whether it's coming from an app or from the web or whatever. And it'd be kind of interesting to see Apple go another step further and do that as well.
Moving on, speaking of turning things into standalone apps, I think it's time for the passwords feature of settings to become a full-on application on iOS.
Yes.
I cannot believe that Apple's keychain and password creation tool is still just a settings page. I've been arguing in favor of this for the past couple of years. I always have a mention in my iOS reviews that tool, that feature is really well done. And Apple's engineers put a lot of work into adopting standards like the well-known URLs, which is like a common standard for updating your password, right? On a website that takes you to a specific login page, for example. All of this, password creation, search, secure password generation, integration with apps. I think passwords should be a standalone app that encourages people to create strong passwords, that makes it easier to find those passwords again, and that maybe in the process, Apple could finally also support things like two-factor authentication codes, which right now, if you want to create one of those, you got to use a third-party password manager, like 1Password, for example. I think it's time that, the passwords functionality gets more features and also becomes a standalone utility instead of just a really well done, admittedly, settings page.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And those codes you get sent to you by text message aren't as secure, but they're so much more convenient because that you can drop them so quickly into an app because that's built into the system. I'd love to see that sort of thing work with two-factor authentication too. It'd be very nice. And I don't know. I mean, we've got Keychain, which is a separate app on the Mac, but it's also much more complex on the Mac because it shows you certificates and all kinds of other things as well. And on the Mac, you've also got passwords stored in the settings for Safari. So I'm not sure where Apple's going with this, but I feel like one app that works basically across all platforms with a standardized UI for mainly just passwords and things like two-factor authentication codes would go a long way to helping people keep organized with all of their passwords. So yeah, I'd like to see this as well. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by App Figures. The developers out there probably already know about App Figures for Analytics, which lets you see the downloads, revenues, and store performance for all of your games and apps in one place. It's an indispensable tool for monitoring the performance of your apps. Here's the thing, though. With App Figures, you can also get more downloads with easy-to-use App Store optimization tools. More downloads and more sales helps you build a stronger, more sustainable business. On top of that, App Figures also gives you competitive insights into how competing apps perform with app intelligence that reports downloads and revenues for the competition. Before I started writing at Mac Stories, I made a couple of iOS apps, and App Figures was an invaluable tool for helping me understand how those apps were performing and in planning the business side of things efficiently so I could spend as much time as possible working on those apps. Beyond its core tools, App Figures also offers tons of free guides, tutorials, and hands-on learning materials so you can grow your downloads even if you're not sure of how to get started. That's exactly the sort of thing that I did when I got started. With all of this coming at a reasonable price, there's never been a better time to check out App Figures. So head on over to appfigures.com and try App Figures for free. If you like it, use our special code AppStories3030 to get 30% off for your first 3 months. That's a fantastic deal that not only will save you money, but will help you make more with your apps too. Once again, that's appfigures.com and the code AppStories3030. That's the numbers 3030 at checkout for a 30% discount for your first 3 months. App Figures, analytics, intelligence, and App Store optimization tools. Our thanks to App Figures for their support of the show. We should talk about, Federico, next. We should talk about shortcuts because, of course, there are always things that we want with shortcuts, and I know you have quite a few here. I have...
No, you tell me what you want first. You tell me what you want.
All right. This is one that I've thought about ever since I started doing longer shortcuts, which is, sometimes it's just too easy to accidentally drag them out of order. And yes, there's an undo button, which is great. That was a big addition to the app. But I'd like to be able to lock my shortcuts. I'd like to be able to take those ones that I use for Club Mac Stories every single week and just lock them so that there's no way for them to change, because they haven't changed. They haven't changed in years. And I use them so often that there is always an opportunity, if I actually open the shortcut as opposed to just tapping the button, to messing it up somehow. So I'd like to be able to lock them. That's one that I'd like to see a lot. What else? I'd like to see shortcuts come out of the Shortcuts app and actually be actions embeddable in apps themselves, so that I know that this is something that you've talked about before with apps like Tayo that has its own system for automating things in that app. It'd be great if Shortcuts was kind of a little toolbox of actions that could be brought into apps and used within the apps themselves instead of being a separate destination where people have to go to run those things. Let people run them in line in an app.
That's a good one. I really like it. Okay. Well, I think there's a whole conversation to be had about, like, should Shortcuts also be able to automate UI in third-party apps, sort of like you can with tools like Keyboard Maestro, for example, on the Mac. And that is a whole other topic that I believe the answer is yes, but I don't know just how far Apple wants to take Shortcuts. So we'll see in iOS 15. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do this year, because it's either nothing would be my assumption, or there's the next big step, because iOS 14 felt like a transition period, right? Some bug fixes, compact UI, and fewer new actions than the previous year. Now it's either continuing down that path of maintaining compatibility and no big updates, or the next big thing for Shortcuts, which I think should be, yes, controlling UI and lifting even more restrictions.
Although arguably, as we talked about last week, the next big thing should be the Mac, in which case I could see iOS and iPadOS not getting a lot of new features and Shortcuts, which I'd be sad about. But if they really go all in on the Mac, it might be kind of a down year on the other platforms.
But the counter argument to that is, if you make Shortcuts for Mac, assuming that on the Mac you're going to allow for greater control of interfaces of third-party applications, if you do the work there, why not bring it over to iOS and iPadOS too?
Yep, good point. Good point.
So we'll see. Anyway.
We want it all, is what we're saying, I think.
Always. Anyway, let's see. On my list of wishes for Shortcuts, more power user tools. I mentioned this a bunch of times before. Let me have some kind of debugger or a way to pause the execution of a shortcut at a specific point to analyze the data flow, for example, from one action to another. And right now I do this with like alert actions that sort of fake their way around pausing the shortcut and displaying the input and output of actions, but there should be a proper way to do this. Let me color code my actions, or let me fold blocks of actions like conditional blocks or menus so that they occupy less space on screen. Little things like that apps like Editorial figured this out years ago, and it would be pretty cool to have them in Shortcuts too.
Yeah, that would be nice.
I would like to see a lot of updates to existing actions. There's a lot of old limitations that I think it's time for Apple to lift, like the Notes actions, the Apple Notes actions in Shortcuts. They are still limited to plain text, even though Notes is a rich text editor. You cannot pass any rich text or file attachments to the Apple Notes actions, for example. Or, I don't know, let me put together rich lists, right? Lists that have icons or thumbnails. Right now, if I want to create those custom lists, I got to use workarounds or I have to use third-party utilities. And I think this should be a native UI design feature in shortcuts. Like, give me greater flexibility when it comes to designing lists and other interface elements in shortcuts. Or take the music actions, for example. Those are limited to your personal music library. You cannot search the full online Apple Music catalog with those actions. If you want to do that, you need Toolbox Pro, or again, another third-party utility that actually talks to the Apple Music API. So it's the little things like that I think it's time for Apple to fix. Also on my list, have a proper integration with the file system. Shortcuts is still limited if you want to get a file or save a file programmatically without showing any UI, without showing a file picker. It's still limited to the iCloud Drive /shortcuts directory.
Right.
And I just want to be able to programmatically get access to any folder, to any location. Once again, I can do this today. However, I gotta install Toolbox Pro, which lets me create a permanent, persistent bookmark to any folder, to any file, which I then can access via an action. The widgets, the shortcuts widgets, I complained about this in my review last year. I feel like they are too low on information density. I would love to have a more compact grid of shortcuts, especially in the medium widget. I feel like just having 4.
Yeah, it really should be 8, I think.
Yeah.
That's what things like drafts does that, and it's perfectly fine.
And it's totally used. Exactly. So have more compact widgets, or I don't know, maybe Apple this year will introduce even more widget layout options, and maybe we'll have a one by one, super small widget, or maybe we'll have different shapes, different sizes. We'll see. I just want to have more options when it comes to shortcuts on the home screen. And lastly, I will mention I actually complained about this on Mac Stories too. Let me get rid of the confirmation alert that I get at the end of a shortcut when I run it from the home screen or the share sheet or, Spotlight, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Just that banner that pops down from the status bar with the check mark. It's annoying, not just because I have to see it every time, but because it blocks interactions in the UI for a second.
It feels like forever, though. It feels like more than a second.
And it adds up over time, right? And it's why, at some point I thought, I want to customize the icon for Safari using shortcuts. But it's impossible to do because I tap on the Safari icon hundreds of times each day.
Right.
And every time I do that, I got to see that banner. And I cannot accept that any longer. So please let me, I get it. When I tap on that icon, I run a shortcut. I'm perfectly aware of that because I created the shortcut. So it feels like, I don't know, maybe after 10 times, 20 times you show me the banner, maybe just stop,
Right. Offer to turn it off or something.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Devon Technologies, the makers of DevonThink. Whether you're in the harbor or on the high seas, you need to know where you are and where you're sailing. If you have all the maps, books, and documents you need, DevonThink for Mac and DevonThink to Go for iOS will not let you down on your mission to help you navigate the 7 seas of information. All right, jokes aside, DevonThink helps you get organized in the office, home office, and on the go. Everybody has a whole bunch of documents, bookmarks, notes, snippets, you name it. And it's hard to keep track of all that stuff. That is, unless you use DevonThink, which elegantly handles all of that and more in one neat, tidy, and organized place. Organize everything in whatever way makes sense to you, and let DevonThink use its unique AI to assist with things like filing and finding. And if that wasn't enough, smart rules and flexible reminders let you delegate all the boring, repetitive daily tasks to DevonThink too. On iOS, you can use shortcuts actions to integrate DevonThink to Go with your other apps. And of course, whatever you keep in your database remains yours. It's all stored locally, and nothing is uploaded anywhere unless you say so. The app's flexible synchronization technology uses strong encryption to make sure that all of your important documents are with you on whatever device you're using and stored securely. DevonThink can use iCloud, Dropbox, and WebDAV and synchronize over your local network. And of course, there's so much more, from email archiving and scanning to an embedded web server for sharing your data securely with your team. Listeners of this show can get a 10% discount on DevonThink 3 and upgrades by going to the URL devontechnologies.com/appstories. Again, that URL to get 10% off DevonThink 3 or upgrades is devontechnologies.com/appstories. Our thanks to Devon Technologies for their support of the show.
John, talk to me about home. You're the home guy.
Yeah, I'm the home guy, and I've got lots of wishes for home. I still think, especially on the iPhone, that the UI of home is just too clunky. Those big chunky tiles, those square tiles, are too much, and I'd like some sort of compact UI for at least the iPhone. I found that it's much more manageable on an iPad or on the Mac because you just have more screen space. But on the iPhone, if you have a lot of devices, it gets crowded very quickly. So I'd like to see that be more compact. I'd also like to see Home adopt all of the HomeKit APIs, which we've talked about in the past, Federico. It's kind of baffling that the APIs offer things that the Home app can't do, but apps like Home Plus 5 can do. And it feels strange when you get these, you try a third-party app and it can do things that the Home app itself can't do, and you wonder, what kind of magic are they performing here? And the reality is they're not performing any magic at all. It's all part of the HomeKit APIs. It's just not in the Home app itself. Beyond that, I like automations a lot. I think it's great that Shortcuts is effectively baked into the Home app, but it's super limited because the only actions available are the scripting, location, documents, and web actions. And you can, if you find some good webhook APIs and things like that, or use some of the scripting stuff, you can get around a fair number of limitations. But I'd like to have third-party apps available in there too. Let me have more of my actions that I would have in the Shortcuts app available right inside the Home app. That would be terrific as well. I guess from a troubleshooting standpoint, the other thing I'd like to see is something that allows you to deal with the no response notifications better. Because a lot of times, and I find this is true a lot with things like Hue lights, which are operating on an older mesh network technology, where for whatever reason, network conditions, whatever it is, they will drop off the network, or they will at least be unresponsive in the Home UI, and it will say no response in the UI. But there's no real way to deal with that other than maybe keep tapping it or refreshing the page and hoping it connects back to the network. I'd like to see some sort of APIs available to third parties to allow for some kind of troubleshooting mechanism there so that you could get those things back on your network from within the Home app without fiddling around with a bunch of third-party apps and trying other kinds of trial and error type things. Beyond that, I guess I still wish for some sort of presence where you can trigger things based on, not only a geofence, but where you are within your home and who is doing what within your home, right? So Federico walks by his HomePod, if he still had one, as opposed to Sylvia being right there.
And maybe I walk by your home.
Maybe you do. Yeah. and I set the alarm system off because Federico's creeping around my house. But yeah, exactly. I'd like that to be a thing. I know there has been some speculation about whether maybe AirTags are going that direction because they have the U1 chip in them. I'm not so sure about that because they also have a teeny tiny little battery in them. And it's one thing to trigger an AirTag in order to figure out where your lost keys are once they're lost. It's a whole other thing to have them constantly powered and reporting their location. But the HomePod Mini has a U1 chip in it. Your watch has a chip in it. Your phone has a chip in it. We're getting to the point where there will be enough devices, at least in some people's homes, where you can have some sort of presence, and that ought to be baked into the Home app as well.
Yeah. All good wishes, but I'm a man of simple needs when it comes to home. I just want to have a home widget and a camera widget. Like, I think it's very surprising that there's no home widgets at all in iOS 14. And I guess Aaron Pierce, the developer of Home Run and HomeCam, will not like my suggestions. I'm really sorry, Aaron, but I really feel like there should be, like, Apple should provide users with a basic widget for controlling accessories, controlling lights, and checking on the status of HomeKit cameras. Now, I still think there's going to be a place for more advanced use cases, and that's where utilities like HomeCam and HomeRun come in, especially for the total like customization, go wild with custom icons and colors approach of HomeRun. But there should be a base widget made by Apple. However, I feel like the reason we didn't get it last year, we just mentioned it a few minutes ago, is because iOS 14 widgets are not interactive.
Right.
And I feel like Apple, if they're making a home widget that lets you, turn off the lights with one tap, maybe they want to wait for widget interaction. The other potential argument against HomeKit widgets is you can just use Control Center, right? You can just swipe down and have your home favorites. But I still feel like there should be widgets for it as well.
Well, the argument for it, Federico, is that Shortcuts has a widget that's interactive and does effectively the same thing. I mean,
see, that's a private API that they're using.
I know. But the Home app ought to be able to do that too. Let you set your scenes and do that sort of thing. I think the cameras is a great idea too. Although I think that is because it would be a live video feed is probably one of those hardware constrained things that might take a little while to get.
But I mean, if you have 16 gigs of RAM on an iPad, you can do that, right? I'm moving to files. Now, I have a love-hate relationship, and maybe these days is more,
the more you use the Mac, the more it becomes a hate relationship, I suspect.
Well, yes, because like I can see the great divide between Finder and Files, and I feel like Files has a long way to go to match the number of features. Like, I don't want to talk about the reliability of the Finder because I know that it comes with its own problems. But at the very least, in terms of features, I feel like Files is very much stuck in a, sort of a, maybe like to an extent, it seems to be stuck in a pre-iPad Pro world where it's still a very basic file manager that doesn't have any kind of slightly advanced action, like let me search the contents of my files, like let me search for what's inside a PDF document or what's inside a plain text document, and you cannot do that. Sorting options, you have many more of those on the Mac compared to the 3-4 options that you have in Files for iOS. I still cannot create smart folders or saved searches. You cannot do basic things like change the extension of a file or see the progress of a copy and paste session.
Right.
You cannot rename folders when you're saving. Like, there's still a lot of like basic interactions that the Mac got right decades ago, and that I feel like in this endless chase for simplicity, maybe Apple got at some point a little bit of like tunnel vision, and I feel like it's time to accept that for some things it's fine to add complexity, because managing files is a complex thing. Like it's a when you think about it, a lot of people shouldn't worry about it, and I get it. Apple tried to abstract the whole idea of file management years ago, and eventually they had to cave and actually make a Files app for iOS and iPadOS. But I also feel like there's an odd dissonance.
Yeah, it's stuck in between, right? It's kind of stuck in between the old world and the new world.
Yes, and it's odd because the same company that sells you an iPad Pro, right, that comes with an M1 chip and 16 gigs of RAM.
And up to 2 terabytes of storage for that file app.
2 terabytes of storage for those files is also making a files app that is extremely basic. I find it very strange.
Yeah, I'm right there with you with all the file stuff. I mean, I don't have anything to add, but I think it is time for that app to get a makeover. And the one sorting thing that drives me bananas is the lack of a date added sorting feature, because this is something I do on the Mac all the time. Somebody sends me a file that has a creation date that's really old, but I just got it from them in email. So I don't want it to be down in the middle of the list. I want to be able to sort it so I can see what I just downloaded from my email app. And I can't do that on the iPad or the iPhone, which is crazy. Federico, let's talk about podcasts, because, Apple's had a lot of news recently about podcasts. And I was thinking about this. And one of the things I know that you suggested that you'd like to see transcript access. And I was thinking about this in the context of the new podcast subscriptions that were just rolled out. And I kind of don't see why this wasn't one of the perks that Apple floated out there for creators, that if you join this program, we're going to transcribe your shows automatically and people will be able to search through the content. I think that would be a great thing to add for creators. And I hope somebody at Apple in the podcast group is listening.
Yeah. For podcasts, have you ever thought about having playback effects?
Do you mean like speeding up voices like Overcast or Castro does? Yeah, no, it would be nice.
Voice boosting, something like Smart Speed. I know that it sucks when Apple takes features from third-party developers and they roll it into their own thing. But sometimes, you gotta ask yourself the question, is this the kind of feature that the platform owner will eventually copy because it's become so common and so expected that it makes sense for it to exist in the default application that everybody has on their phones? And I feel like we've seen signs that potentially Apple could do this. I don't know if you remember, John, how I think it was last year in 14 that voice memos
right
got that feature, that playback enhance feature that basically reduces background noise and makes your voice louder and more clear when you're listening back to a recording in voice memos. Now, I know that it's potentially a stretch, but what if Apple took the basic idea of that feature, right, and added a simple toggle to podcasts called Playback Enhance that boosts the voice and reduces background noises and makes a lot of podcasts, right, sound better?
Yeah, they've obviously got the engineers to do that. I mean, it's really an extension of Logic more than anything else, and they've shown that they can do it with voice memos. So I agree, it would be good. I'd also, another third-party feature that we see in a lot of podcast app that I'd like to see is snippet sharing. And again, this is the kind of thing that could be integrated with the new podcast subscriptions, where you could create a snippet of a show right there in the Apple Podcast app and include a button that would take someone to your subscription page if you're offering a subscription to your podcast. So there's a lot of things that can be done both to make that app better, and because it's been going through some changes with 14.5, which I know a lot of people are unhappy about, but there are a lot more things that could be done, as well as ways that it could be even better integrated with this new subscription program.
Yeah. I feel like time-stamped sharing, especially now that Spotify has it, I feel like it's coming to Apple Podcasts for sure. My last one, and then I know that you have your own list of other quick things that you want to mention, but my last one is music, because after I'm a Spotify user now. However, I'm always keeping an open mind on things. Me and music streaming services, we have an open relationship.
Good.
Any other service is welcome to join. Faster search. This is something that I started to appreciate in Spotify after I switched to Spotify. Searching in Spotify is really fast, and searching in music is really slow. So I feel like I just want Apple to match that speed. Like when you're typing, you see results in real time underneath the search bar in Spotify. And I would like to have the same feature in Apple Music. And in the music app, smart playlists, obviously, this is the kind of feature that I loved back in my Mac days with iTunes, when it used to be called iTunes. I just love the idea of putting together smart filters, smart folders, and in this case, playlists, so that I could do things like my most played songs in the last 2 weeks, or like even more advanced filters, like, I don't know, songs by Oasis that I haven't played in the past 2 years, for example. Little things like that. I feel like it's a power user feature that, however, is a good idea and needs to exist.
Yeah, I agree. I'd also like to see Apple Music do more with the algorithmic playlists, because I've been trying out Spotify again myself, and Spotify just does such a great job with everything from the daily mixes to, I don't know, the release radar and all those other things. And there are some analogs to some of those playlists that you find on Spotify on Apple Music, but I think the collection of what you can get on Spotify is a lot deeper. And if you are a heavy Apple Music user, it's easy to kind of go through your playlists in a given week that you enjoy and then run out of them, which I have done before. So I do try to explore and find new ones all the time, because there are a lot of playlists there that get regularly updated. But I would like to see more of these that are based on either new releases or discovering things that fit either a particular genre or era in your music history library. So I'd love to see that. All right, Federico, I guess it's lightning round time, maybe. I've got a bunch of little things. I would like to see Messages, which got a big facelift last year, updated some more. I think that the reply UI, while I'm glad it exists, it's clunky, and we've been able to knot it into pretzels. It does these weird curly Q things. If you have people,
pretzels, yes,
right, it looks like little pretzels in the margins of your chat with your friends, and it can be a little hard to tell who's replying to what if there's a lot of different conversations going on at once. And I'd like to see that refined a little bit. Plus, I'd like to see more control over individual threads. Everybody has that thread that they don't feel they can leave for, I don't know, social reasons, but they don't want to look at it all the time, and they don't want to see the badges, the notifications. And it'd be nice if there was a way not just to kind of mute it so that you don't get the badges, but to really deep six it so you just don't see it, but you're still subscribed to it if you're trying to be polite. In fitness, Federico, Maps is already integrated. If you go out for a walk or a run or something, or a bike ride, you can, after the fact, go back and look at the map and see where you went. I'd like to see that kind of surfaced as a way of creating outdoor workouts for people, where you could take that route and say, all right, a week ago I went walking in this on this path in my neighborhood. I'm going to do the same thing again today, and I want the app to follow me along and say, oh, you're doing 30 seconds better than you did last week at this point at the 1 mile marker or whatever. Bring it in. I've seen some third-party apps doing this kind of thing, but I think Fitness has done such a good job with the Fitness Plus service for doing indoor workouts, and it has some outdoor components too, but I think it could go a lot further outdoors, especially at least in the Northern Hemisphere now that it's getting warmer. It would be kind of nice to have that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Also, photos. I want to be able to send my screenshots somewhere other than my photo library, because I take a lot of screenshots, and I'd like to be able to change the default to a folder in files so they don't get mixed in with all my family photos. The other thing is one that I'll mention forever. It's been a bug. I consider it a bug. It's been there forever. It's far too easy to inadvertently convert a PNG to a JPEG in Photos. Basically, anytime you do any sort of edit from within the Photos app and then save it back to the photo roll, it becomes a JPEG, and that's a problem if you're doing things that that look better with a transparent background, because all of a sudden it's white. So, I'm used to it. I work around it, but it also still drives me a little bit crazy. With books, we've talked a lot about sharing quotes and saving quotes in various places. Apple Books has this incredibly long string of text whenever you copy something that says, copyright such and such, copied from Apple Books. It's this long, wordy sentence. I understand why it's there. If it has to be there, let it be a link or something, like a citation link, so that I can tap on it, right, and find the details on the web. Maybe take me straight to the Apple bookstore. I don't want that long string of text when I copy a quote. Beyond that, I don't know, Federico. I mean, test flight, it always needs to be a little better than it is, I think.
It just needs to be faster. It takes forever to load.
It takes forever. And I'll tell you, the auto updating has never worked for me. I don't know why.
Really?
It doesn't work on any of my devices, and never has. And I've got it turned on everywhere, but it doesn't work. So I'm always going in and updating manually. And I guess finally I'd mention family sharing, because I was kind of disappointed with the AirTags and the fact that if I put them on my keys and my wife takes that set of keys and that AirTag is assigned to me, that she's going to get bugged by the fact that she's being followed by an AirTag that's not her own. And I just feel like, although things like subscriptions have added family sharing that allow you to share app subscriptions with your family members, family sharing is still feels like an afterthought with a lot of services. It's as though Apple assumes that everybody lives by themselves with no roommates, no family members, no partners, nothing. And that's just not the case. And it needs to be something that they do a little bit better with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that it? I think we did it.
Yeah, I think we did it. We still have iPad OS to go. And with the iPad Pro coming out, we have some ideas there too. So we'll be back with another episode there. We're also, as a sneak peek, we are going to be doing extra episodes during WWDC like last year. So there's going to be a lot of app stories coming up.
Yeah, there's some surprises coming out.
Surprises.
Soon.
Soon. Bonus episodes. Lots of things going on at Mac Story. Mac Stories has got a lot going on these days, and it's going to all start being revealed in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for things. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again for this episode, and that is Linode, AppFigures, and Devon Technologies, the makers of DevonThink. You can find me and Federico over at Mac Stories. Federico is also Viticci on Instagram and Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.